Introduction. How do you stop an addiction? Understanding why drugs feel so good and how they affect your brain can help you break free from an addiction. In this book, you will learn what part of the brain do drugs stimulate? What is the addictive process? What effects do addictive substances have on your body? Is it possible to be predisposed to addiction? What preventive actions can be taken against addiction? Our answers to these questions are easy to understand, simple to implement, and quick to execute. Ready to stop an addiction? Let's go. What part of the brain do drugs stimulate? When we take a substance, the part of the brain that is stimulated is the nucleus accumbens. This stimulation causes us to release dopamine, a neurotransmitter responsible for pleasure. And when that pleasant feeling wears off, we want to do it again. But that doesn't explain the addiction. There is another process at work in parallel. What is the process that creates addiction? Habituation is the process that creates addiction. Along with the release of dopamine, this system releases hormones and neurotransmitters that are supposed to have the exact opposite effect in order to maintain a balance in the body. For example, the more coffee you drink to wake up, the shorter the stimulation of brain activity to keep the body in balance. And that encourages you to increase your intake more and more to get the stimulation you need to feel awake. Once the body gets used to an addictive substance, it becomes very difficult to get rid of it. What are the effects of addictive substances on your body? For any given substance, the effects on our bodies will be the same for everyone. But because we are all unique, our degree of addiction will be different. THC enhances our environment. Even the most mundane stimuli feel amazing and positive. But when the effect wears off, life seems bleak. Opiates inhibit our sense of pain. But when the effect wears off, the pain we feel is amplified. Alcohol makes us feel good, relaxed, and connected to others in social situations by releasing beta endorphins. But those who naturally have low levels of beta endorphins are more vulnerable to alcoholism with this need for social lubricant. Cocaine increases the feeling of pleasure tenfold for about 30 minutes. But when the effect wears off, a sense of anxiety and sadness sets in. Sedatives help you calm down and relax. But when the effect wears off, it is impossible to fall asleep without a sedative. Is it possible to be prone to addiction? Some people may be more predisposed than others to the risk of addiction because of their genetic makeup. For example, if you were born to parents with a history of addiction, you have a high risk of becoming an addict yourself. And even if you are adopted at birth from a family with no history of addiction. But that's not all. Epigenetics could have a similar impact. Simply put, epigenetics is the study of how individual traits emerge in response to a specific environment, and how these traits are passed on genetically from one generation to the next. For example, if your parents have experienced famine, their metabolism adapts to survive on little food. And if the next generation does not experience starvation, they will tend to gain weight. What preventive actions can be taken against addiction? In addition to the factors that can promote addiction, such as genetics and epigenetics, it is important to educate from an early age about the effects and risks of addiction and to delay exposure to addictive substances until adulthood. For example, if you were exposed to THC as a teenager, you will be less sensitive to rewarding feelings as an adult, including feelings stimulated by drugs, and that will lead you to take higher doses. There's also a ripple effect. If you start taking one drug, you may find it easier to succumb to others. Finally, it is important to do prevention with teenagers because they will have difficulty evaluating the long-term consequences of an action against the immediate perceived benefits, as their prefrontal cortex allowing this reflection is not fully developed. Conclusion: as pleasant as the effects of an addictive substance are, the next phase will be its opposite, and this phase will drive you to seek another dose. But when your body counters the effects and makes you less sensitive, it will prompt you to take a higher dose again. Understanding this cycle of addiction will help you get through it more easily. If you like the summary, click on one of our partner links to discover Never Enough: The Neuroscience and Experience of Addiction by Judith Grisel in ebook, book or audiobook format. And if you're not interested in reading further, we recommend you discover The Compass of Pleasure: How Our Brains Make Fatty Foods, Orgasm, Exercise, Marijuana, Generosity, Vodka, Learning and Gambling Feel So Good by David J. Linden. Introduction: How to Stop an Addiction. By understanding the brain structure of pleasure, you will be able to better understand how we find pleasure in an activity and why we may fall into an addiction. In this book, you will learn: how do we find pleasure in an activity? How can we become addicted to a substance? How can we become obese despite ourselves? What is the difference between love and sex in our sense of pleasure? How can we become addicted to gambling? How can we activate the pleasure circuit with a healthy habit? Our answers to these questions are easy to understand, simple to implement, and quick to execute. Ready to stop an addiction? Let's go.